sorry. Why is it not showing? Did I did something wrong? Hello? Ah, yes, there it is. Okay. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here today. And what I will be talking today, it's a work that I did while I was doing a little bit of my PhD and a postdoc research in the Synchrotron Soleil Unité Mixte de Physique in Ciénaga Estales. But currently I'm working in Chile in another topic, spintronics, spin-to-charge conversion. So this is something that we did before, and it was quite interesting. So first of all, if you note, my title has the chiral word in it. So why chirality can be important for any system? And this is a very good example that two systems that are exactly the same but have different chirality, they already taste different or smell different. So you have, for example, basil and cumin, that they smell different. In the same way, for example, magnetic structures that have some chirality properties like skirmions or domain walls, they will move differently if depending of the chirality that they have, or they will have a different signal if you measure it, for example, in MFM. So chirality is important to study. At the same time, why we need to use X-rays? I think this part has already been talked by the previous speakers. The tunable energy give us element specificity, so we can choose the element that we want to see, even in a multi-layer system. It yields information of the reciprocal space, so in one shot, we already have all the information that we need, and I will show you later. The short wavelengths allow us to achieve a nanometer resolution, a spatial resolution, and we can study magnetism through the XMCD, which is the different response that the magnetic material have to the polarization of the X-rays. So in an example of how the XMCD will look like, if you have a reflection diffraction pattern with one circular polarization and then you have another one, they will look different already. So this, for those that doesn't know, this is an image that is captured by the CCD camera in a synchrotron, okay? And is the reciprocal space of the reflection of X-ray. So if you have these lobes, the distance from the center will already give you the periodicity. The number of modes that you will see will give you information of the sample. And if you subtract these two, you will have just the magnetic information of the sample. So it's quite interesting to use the XMCD effect. In this sample I will talk, and all the samples that I will show in this talk are multi-layer devices. So multi-layer devices are very nice because we can engineer, as we have seen before, different types of magnetic structures. If we have a ferromagnetic coupling, we can have hybrid chiral domain walls, or we can have skirmions, as an example that I will show you later, but we can also engineer antiferromagnetic couplings, which are called synthetic antiferromagnets. And in this case, we can have a spin spiral. I will also show you two types of modes. So my talk is mostly focused in the first part of my talk will talk about a reflection mode, which it won't give you an image straight away, but it will give you information of the 3D structures of the magnetics that we are seeing. So in reflection mode, if we shine X-rays through these multi-layered systems, the interference between the different X-rays passing through the layers will create a spectrum, okay? And when you are in the Bragg angle, that means when all the interferences are constructive, you will have a spectrum with a signal. But if we do the same Bragg angle in a sample that has an antiferromagnetic coupling, and these layers are perfectly compensated, you won't have a magnetic signal. So you can keep in mind that for the next slide. So today, I will be talking about some chiral spin spirals in synthetic antiferromagnets. Then we will move to hybrid chiral domain walls, which are domain walls that have Bloch and Nel parts, and they have two chiralities. And then I will do some imaging, and I will show you skirmions and some works that we've been doing with Heraldo. In this case, the reflection mode that we will be using was done in Soleil. This is to study antiferromagnetic samples. We are using XRMS. This is X-ray resonant magnetic scattering. And this means that we will be using the energy that maximizes the X-ray circular magnetic dichroism. In this case, that energy is given at the iron edge. That means we're using this energy at different values of incidence of the X-rays, of the X-rays. with circular polarized light and with some temperature-dependent measurements later for showing something very interesting. So why we need antiferromagnets? That's probably all the questions that we have solved during this conference. That it's when there is a cancellation of the dipolar field, it will allow us to move skirmions without any canting to the sides. That's one thing that we want to, if we want to achieve a fast and a long length movement of skirmions. If you see, this is an image of the MFM of the sample that we optimized to obtain a spin spiral texture. You might see that there are no domain walls because basically what is happening with when the magnetization is just rotating in one direction. And you can get this type of samples by engineering the spacer between the magnetic layers, which in this case cobalt of boron. So the first measurement that we do when we do reflection is the reflection as an angular dependence, and the Bragg angle, which is where you have this constructive interference between the magnetic layers, in this case is given by the sample period of the chemical composition of the layer, which is 2.15 nanometers, and it's at 26 degrees. Okay, so let's go there, let's see what we are seeing. Probably, I don't know, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but the idea of the talk and the results that I will show you, it's how to obtain practical data from the 3D structure, but in much more or less time, in less time than the regular imaging measurements, because at the end, when you are doing imaging, is that what you're looking for, to see how many block points do you have, or what is the structure of the chirality of your sample. So we go to the Bragg peak, and as I explained you before, we don't see anything. We should have seen a ring here, but because we are shining, what I'm showing you here is the circular left and circular right diffraction patterns, but added. And because we are shining the light and we are in the Bragg angle, we are sensing these two layers that they have an opposite magnetic scattering factor, and therefore you have no signal. But if you go to half of the magnetic of the Bragg angle, you are sensing now the two magnetic layers that give you a coherent, a constructive interference, and then you have a signal. If you think, okay, if I go to 3.5 of the Bragg angle, I also get the ring, but now if I go to two Bragg angles, I won't get the signal. So it's quite nice to see that I already have a very compensated spin spiral in the system. Now, I talk about chirality. How do I measure chirality in these systems? And this is a very nice work by John Eve, which is there, that took the Dürr works from 99 and extended into this into part, that we can use the asymmetry ratio, which means the difference between the two patterns normalized by the sum. And they will give us an image in this way. Okay, you will have two lobes and they will have two signs. And depending on the position of the lobes and the sign of the lobes, regarding the K vector of the X-ray, you can tell if you have a nil or a block wall and if it's clockwise or counterclockwise. So when we do this analysis in our sample, we can see that the layers that produce a constructive interference are clockwise, counterclockwise nil spin spirals in this case. Now, we wanted to see how robust was this spin spiral in terms of temperature, and we did temperature measurements. We measured the magnetization saturation of the sample, the RKKY field, and the effective field, and we can see that all of them change in temperature. But surprisingly, what it doesn't change in temperature, it's the magnetic period. How we measure that from what I showed you before is the position of the peaks. If they move away or they may move into the center, they will change. This doesn't change. What this is telling us that even though the magnetic properties of the sample are changing, what is not changing is the ratio between the symmetric exchange stiffness A and the asymmetric DMI constants. There was an interesting poster that was analyzing this from first principles as well. Well, it was atomistic spin calculation, so it was kind of a corroboration of what I was showing you here. Then we also did some simulations to see if the code that I will show you later works for this. For the reflectance in the dependence of the reflection in the angles, so the Bragg angle and the second, and the 2 times the Bragg angle are in well agreement, but the rest is not that much in well agreement because of the roughness, and the roughness is also important for this model. But in any case, what I wanted to show you is that these simulations agrees with the fact that you just see the intensity of this magnetic ring appearing at half of the Bragg angle and at 3/2 of the Bragg angle. Now I want to show you something different, that is the magnetic structures that are formed in these ferromagnetic coupling layers, ferromagnetic couplet layers, which are hybrid chiral domain walls. So what is a hybrid chiral domain wall? A domain wall that on the top has a nil clockwise domain wall type. At the bottom has a contact clockwise, so you have already a hybrid chirality, but in the center you have a block type domain wall. That means that the magnetization in this point is going into the screen. And we can do that due to the engineering of the distances between the layers, the materials that are we using, because we are playing with we are playing with the DMI interaction, the Eskimori interaction, and the Heisenberg interaction. So one wants to promote the parallel alignment, and the other ones want to promote the canting of the spin. So moving or changing this, the stacking order and the thicknesses of our layers, we can put manually, for saying in some way, the position of the block point at different distances in the in-depth of the sample. So we did 3 samples. We fabricated the sample S1 with a D that is positive, with the block point close to the surface, and then we fabricated another sample with a D negative that has the block point close to the substrate. And we also have a reference that has no block point. It's just a pure nil domain wall. And in this case, we use Soleil and Alba synchrotrons, X-ray magnetic scattering in the cobalt edge energy, using always the Bragg peak, and we use the circular polarized data. But differently to what I showed you before, that we make a radial integration of the ring, in this case, what we wanted to do, it's an average of each column in the sensor, because what we wanted to see is how these peaks change in position and how the intensity of the peaks change when we apply an external field in plane. Because when we apply an external field in plane, we will make this block point even bigger or smaller, and we can sense that through the X-rays. So this information is already part of the 3D, or the in-depth instead of the 3D, the in-depth magnetization of the layers. So something important that we have to do is when you average all these columns, you will have a profile like this, and it's really important to get a good and clean background. So what we do is an spline interpolation to subtract the background, and for CL and CR, we have 2 different profiles of the diffraction pattern that we are capturing in the CCD. Did I mute? No? It's okay? Okay. So, what are the results? At 0 field, we see what we were expecting, the first order peak and the third order peak. That's a regular diffraction pattern for a sample which has domain walls in an order way with probably a nil, in this case, a nil domain wall. But when we start applying field, there is a second order peak that appears that it shouldn't appear there. And this is the results from measuring from 1 Tesla to minus 1 Tesla, and this is the domain periodicity of the domains that we are measuring. And you can see that for the first order, there is a maximum and 0, and there is a minimum for that. This is the second order, there is a minimum there. But you have a maximum of the second order in some point that is, in this case, 0.16 Teslas. For the other sample that also has this block point but further into the layer, we have a really dim but existing second order peak. And for the sample that doesn't have this block point, there is no second order peak. Now, what I showed you here was the sum of these two, CL and CR. And now, as I told you, the difference showed you the magnetization information. And for zero field, the peaks, the first order and the third order, which is very small there, but you still can see it, has opposite signs. But when you apply the field, the signs of the second order peaks remains the same for all the fields. How this is seen into a graph, it's that one of the peaks, the one, for example, you can see here the T and the minus T and the plus T, minus T and plus T, have opposite sides for all the fields, but the second order peaks have the same sign, and they change sign when the field change sign. So what does this mean? We can see it better in this way. Oh, I don't know what's happening here, but it's fine. So this is the azimuthal angle of the magnetization, and this color here, which is here, tells you basically that you have the magnetization against or into or out of the screen. The first order peaks tells you already some of the information of the chirality of the nil domain wall, and the second order peak that has a peak here tell us that when we are changing the field, the block point, which is the one that is going in this direction, change in the position to the top, so we are sensing it better, and we have a maximum sensing of that information at this field. And then, if you see this pink point, it's going down till 0, which is buried under a nil domain wall, which is, it has either this or this direction. And this can be also seen in the sample 2 in a similar way and be understood in a similar way. So the next step is to see, okay, what are we seeing in terms of chirality? Is the second order something chiral? It's dichroic already because it behaves differently from two polarities. But when we do the asymmetric ratio, the magnetic asymmetry ratio, we see that both of the peaks for all the samples have opposite signs, and it looks like this. Therefore, we have a clockwise nil domain wall. But this one is not a chiral domain because the signs of the peaks are both the same. So it's like this two blue or this two red. So it doesn't have a chirality. So without imaging anything, we already have a lot of information of the sample and the in-depth magnetization of the sample. And to go further, we can use micromagnetic simulations with some of the experimental values that we got, that D or A or K, and do XRMS simulations that the details are in this paper to make a comparison between the simulated and the experimental data. And that might tell us where the block point is in terms of layers. For example, in this work, this has 20 layers, and we see that the block point for the sample is 1 is in the 17th layer, plus minus 1 layer. And for the sample 2, it's really buried in the 4th layer from the substrate. So this is already good information of the 3D magnetization without imaging, but the interesting part is imaging, so let's go to this. In this case, I would just show you some information about the reflection mode on these skyrmions lattices. This is the sample that we are using, cobalt boron with ruthenium 1.4. Probably you don't remember because I didn't mention it, but the ruthenium for similar sample is almost exactly the same. For the antiferromagnetics was 0.75. That difference, it already makes with the same material an antiferromagnetic or a ferromagnetic coupling. So this is an MFM image of the skyrmions that we got at 75 millitesla. And from the information, you can see that we have this 6-fold symmetry. And because they are in the reciprocal space, this is telling us that in some part of my sample, or in a lot of parts of my sample, I have a honeycomb array, okay, of a 6-fold symmetry, which is something that you can see, for example, some of the places. But the fact that we have a full ring means that these are like dislocated in different parts. So the ring tells us that the domains are quite disordered and that they fill all this space in the reciprocal space. And when we calculate the asymmetry ratio that I showed you before, we can tell straight away that we have clockwise nil skyrmions. But let's go to transmission mode. So no more reflection, now we have transmission. The transmission mode allows us to perform holography. So as Peter was showing before, holography is a very interesting tool, and I really like it because it has, first of all, not X-ray optics, no zoom plate, it's very immune to drifts, and allows us to imaging things till 15 nanometers. But the problem is we can just imagine the component of the magnetization parallel to the X-ray. So if we tilt our sample or the preparation of our sample tell us that for holography we have to have this small reference, that is a very small hole like this. If you tilt the sample, you're already blocking the X-ray, so you can't access with this technique to the in-plane component magnetization at the same time, like tilting the sample. But you can do it if instead of a whole reference, you use a line. And this line produces a new kind of holography, which has the same component of the Fourier, but it's called Heraldo, which is all this title that I won't read because it's too long. But it allows us to image the in-plane magnetization. What we have done with this before, for example, is to image in time resolve mode the in-plane magnetization of vortex gyrating due magnetic pulse. And here we have the in-plane magnetization, but at the same time, just rotating the sample in the same experiment without taking anything out, we have the out-of-plane magnetization, which is the component of the domain walls of this vortex. And it's very nice because, I don't know if you can see it from here, you can see some transverse bullet modes traveling, and it's quite an interesting result. We can also do the same thing with crystals. If we grow the crystal on the top of a silicon nitride window, and because we have this selectivity due to X-rays, we can even imagine magnetic structures underneath contacts. So this is a magnetic droplet produced by a current in a magnetic contact that has 100 nanometers. So the sample that contains the skyrmions has this structure, and this is the setup of the sample. So you have coherent X-rays passing through the skyrmions, producing a diffraction pattern there, and then you have this reference that keeps the phase. It's part of the process of holography, and you will have an image in the reciprocal space. Applying a simple fast Fourier transform, an inverse fast Fourier transform, you can already have the magnetization of the magnetic image of your domains. And because we are working not with MFM and we can apply straight away field, we can go to very, very small skyrmions like this, which when we analyze it are just in the limit of the resolution of our technique, which is 25, 20 nanometers. So it's a very good technique for this. Just as a bonus track, I want to show you what the first measurements of holography that we use UXFEL with Stefano as the leader, the Dodge, that's the same someone before. And because we can use this with XFEL as well. So this is a simple sample, cobalt iron nickel multilayer. This is the image that we got from the synchrotron, and in the same sample that we got from the UXFEL. The main problem with the UXFEL is that they have this huge detector that is an amazing detector, but it doesn't work it works, but it's very complicated to reconstruct the image when you have these all isolated panels in the real world, but then you have to see how because you have the data, but then you have to put all this panel in your computer at the right distance to form the right diffraction scattering pattern, diffraction pattern, so you can reconstruct the magnetic domains. Finally, something that Peter showed, and I don't remember who else showed, I think you also showed it. This is a work where I was almost involved, but I left the CNRS Thales in that moment. And it's doing magnetic cocoons. And how you can do cocoons, how you can build these magnetic cocoons is having this aperiodic multilayer growing. So these are images, X-ray images, no, not holography on these cocoons, where the strong contrast are fully columnar magnetic structures, and this small contrast, which is more fainted and is lower than the other contrast, are these magnetic cocoons. And when you change field, because it's really easy to apply applied field in these experiments, you can see, for example, how these two cocoons can merge into one full columnar structure. So as a summary, the sample engineering to obtain the design magnetic carrier structure is possible. You have to just do probably a pre-simulation to see what you want to get, what are the values of D and A and K that you need for your sample. There's a possibility of using XMCD to study multi-layers of antiferromagnetic, coupled antiferromagnetically. There is the development of this off-specular resonance of X-ray magnetic scattering that you can use to have this information in the 3D material really quick without spending too many days in the synchrotron. And the holography, we can use holography as a tool to study properties of vortices like this, skyrmions, and buried magnetic structures. So I want to thank to everyone, to the people and the government of Chile that are going to give me some money, and CNR Estales and the Synchrotron Soleil. And for example, from this paper that it will be published soon, we have all these collaborators in the name because it's the first one.